So we're working our way through a story in this series called Art, Son of Con. And it's a long, complex story. And each day I'll tell a little bit more, and then I'll take us down some secret rabbit holes of Celtic mythology just for fun. So I'll just give you a quick synopsis of our story so far. The king, Con of the 100 Battles, has got himself into a bit of a pickle. He's married a strange otherworldly woman called Beikva, who was actually in love with his son. He really knows nothing about her. In fact, she told him that her name was Delvkive, and that will be important later. This marriage has brought terrible misfortune to Ireland in the form of a famine. Con's druids have advised him to get rid of Beikva, saying that she's the cause of the famine, but Con, he's smitten with her and he refuses. He asks them for another solution, so they suggest a human sacrifice, as you do. Con has located the kind of person requested by the druid, a lad called Shegda, and he's the son of an otherworldly king and queen. So let's go on with our story. So the druids, they chose a day for the slaying of Shegda. They devised a plan to mix his blood with the soil of the land and to anoint the blighted trees and fields and cattle to make them fruitful again. They made ready a place of sacrifice. The day arrived and the people gathered to watch Shegda give up his life. When all was in readiness, suddenly an old woman wandered into the druid's sacred area. She was wailing and keening and leading a cow which trailed behind her. And this cow had 2 saddlebags hanging down at its sides. Well, the druids asked her what business she had with them, but she returned a question. Why is everyone gathered here today? The situation was explained to her and she scoffed at them. She said, if your druids are so wise, ask them what is in the bags at the sides of the cow. Well, the druids were unable to answer. The woman laughed and she said, I say that you would be as well to slaughter the cow and mix her blood with the soil of Terra as to kill an innocent boy. So they killed the cow. And then she told them to open the 2 saddlebags. Now from one bag, there was a bird came out of the bag and it only had 1 leg. And from the other bag came a bird with 12 legs. And immediately the 2 birds fell to fighting one another, and the bird with 1 leg prevailed over the bird with all the 12 legs. And everyone was quite surprised at this. I will interpret the encounter of these birds, said the hag. The bird with 12 legs is all of you great men, and the 1-legged bird is my son, Shegda, who has prevailed over you all. Take my advice, Con. Put the woman you call Delvkive from you. Banish her from Ireland. She is Beikva, who was expelled from the land of promise, and there will be famine in Ireland as long as she remains. And with that, she took the boy and made to leave. Con offered her gold and jewels in return for better advice, but she only pointed out that he already had good advice if he would only take it. She refused his gifts and led her son away. So, after all this, Con and his starving people are right back where they started, aren't they? Because he won't give Beikva up. And I'm afraid we're going to leave them in this plight for another 24 hours while we travel the back roads of Celtic myth a bit more. So druids often play a part in Irish myth, and they're generally placed as advisors to king or some other responsible role. Most stories look at them with quite a bit of respect, but not always. The druids in our story are a little ambiguous. They initially diagnosed the cause of the famine correctly, I think, yet they also come up with an ineffective plan for a blood sacrifice, and they don't know what's in the cow's saddlebags. From both the classical writers, the Greek and Roman writers, and early Irish sources, we can gather that the druids were once of equal status to kings, that they acted as a kind of priesthood, as well as being poets and the keepers of all kinds of lore, which I talked about a little one other day. As Christianization takes hold in Ireland, and Ireland provides the best record of this process that we have because there were druids in Britain and in Gaul too, of course. It seems like the various druidical functions become increasingly separated, law keeping, lore keeping, priesthood, the different things that they did. Or perhaps these functions were always quite separate. We know very little about the details. So the Welsh bards and the Irish filidh retain a high status and a great deal of power over the kings as the centuries pass. They have the power of prophecy, and their power to praise or satirize the kings can make or break a king's reign. At the same time, they begin to be eyed with a bit of suspicion. They're no doubt in conflict with the Christian priests. And this isn't always over religious doctrine, which I think is what we tend to imagine, so much as it's a power struggle. In Welsh poetry, for example, Taliesin, the great bard, often speaks of monks and priests with great disdain because they're not as learned as the bards. So Taliesin professes himself to be a Christian, but it feels like he views Christianity almost as something which exists within a wider cosmology of the Welsh bards. So in Irish story, their role's a bit variable. Often they're represented as great learned prophets, but it's also not that rare for them to be seen as more like common sorcerers or even as evil. Con's druids kind of hang in the balance. They initially have great insight and give good advice, but they lack the status and wisdom to stand up to Con's attitude and the difficult situation he creates. So they obviously don't have as much power in this story as we're told they once had. Now, you might know that the name of the goddess Boann and the river Boyne, which is named after her, means white cow. There's a lot of deep symbolism around cattle, especially milk cows in Irish myth. And I'll talk us through quite a lot of that in a moment. But before I do, I'll admit that the cow is something which has always troubled me in this particular story. It doesn't seem to be doing what a cow ought to be doing in an Irish myth. Maybe during this series is where I'm going to finally understand this cow. I'm going to really try. I'm learning things too as we go along. And once you've heard what I've got to say about cows in Celtic stories more generally, if you have any ideas about the cow in this story, feel free to share them in the comments. Yesterday, I told a fairy bride story from Wales. There are also stories about fairy cattle, which have a similar structure and kind of cut out the middleman or middle woman. Rather than the human female sovereignty figure, the cow itself is a kind of sovereignty figure. The farmer manages to tame an otherworldly cow belonging to the good folk. And it turns out to be the best cow he's ever had by far. It gives fabulous amounts of creamy milk, gives birth to the best cows he's ever seen. As the years pass, the farmer grows really prosperous because of this cow. The day always comes when the farmer thinks, ooh, this cow's getting old. It can't be long until her milk will dry up. She won't have any more calves. So he does what every farmer would do. He makes plans to slaughter her. But at this stage, either the cow or its immortal owner gets wind of the plan. The result is that the cow runs away back to the other world, often called by the fairy woman it belongs to. And worse, for the farmer, all of its offspring go with it. So one story describes a scene where, as the butcher is about to kill the cow, the fairy woman it belongs to starts wailing loudly from her lake, and the cow and all her progeny run to the lake, and they begin to circle the woman over the water as they all disappear under the waves of the lake. So you could probably see that these stories are about greed, a bit like the husband in the fairy bride stories. The farmer has entered into a kind of sacred partnership with his cow. Because the fairy cow allows it, he's able to extract a greater bounty from her and from the land than he would normally be able to do. He should be bearing in mind the sacred or magical nature of the cow, but he's started to take the situation for granted. He's come to see the cow as simply a possession, and he has the right to do as he likes with his possessions, or so he thinks. His carelessness always ends in disaster. Now, I believe these two story types, fairy brides and fairy cows, preserve quite perfectly a really important piece of mythology, one which tends to get buried or lost among the clutter of longer and more complex stories. So there's a huge warning here for mankind. We have long since stopped heeding this warning. We've taken and taken from the earth, not only agriculturally, but in 1,000 other ways. And now the disasters of the Anthropocene are upon us. But I'll step off my soapbox now and get back to the milking stool. So there are two other Irish stories which hint at a relationship between cows and sovereignty. And as I've said, their meaning can be hard to see, but let's do our best. So there are many Irish folk tales about a cow with a name, which is something like Glasgowan. Now, I say something like, because the name itself is a bit variable. And there are lots of etymological roads we could go down with this, and I'm just going to leave that aside. But I will just say that while glass generally means green in modern Irish, in earlier times it often meant grey or referred to certain colors of animals that were brindled or speckled, just like we talk about grey horses, but some of them are really white. It's the names for the colors of animals are special. So it's probably safe to say a grey cow rather than a green one. I see people getting hung up on that a wee bit. So the cow usually belongs to a smith in these stories, a blacksmith. And the Irish word for smith is goa or gow, depending on the dialect. So the name is usually translated as the grey cow of the smith. Now the Glasgowan appears in many of the stories about the conception of the god Lugh. Often Lugh's father Cian has to recover the cow from Balor, Lugh's grandfather, who's stolen it from the smith. And the smith probably represents the god Gavnu. But the Glasgowan or Gavlin also appears in other stories about a talented swordsmith known as Ellingow. Now these stories are great adventures. They often contain episodes which feel like they could almost be independent stories. So they're almost like sagas. It's not so much the plots which I want to look at today, but some of the descriptions of the cow and her attributes. So the stories I'm quoting from today were collected in Ireland in the 19th century by a folklorist called Jeremiah Curtin. He was American, I think. So please excuse the author's habit of anglicizing the spellings of Irish words. He probably thought he was doing a good thing back in the 1890s when he published this. At that time, there was a smith in Erin called Gaivnan Gow, and he had a cow called the Glasgownach. The smith had a magic halter which he used to tie the cow every night. Glasgownach traveled 3 provinces of Erin every day and came home in the evening. The halter had power over her, and she went always to the halter in the evening if left to herself. The cow gave milk to everyone on her journey each day. No matter how large the vessels that people brought or how many, she filled them. There was no lack of milk in Erin while that cow was in it. She was sent to give food and comfort to all, and she gave it, but especially to the poor. So we can see what kind of bountiful creature she is. The poor will never go hungry as long as she's traveling the lanes of Ireland. But the glass requires a lot of special handling, as we can see in this passage from another story in the same collection. In minding the cow, the man had to follow her always, never go before her. In other words, never walk in front of her, or stop her, or hold her. If he did, she would run home to the castle. The man must stop with her when she wanted to get a bite or a drink. She never traveled less than 60 miles a day, eating a good bite here and a good bite there and going hither and over. So in this story, the cow belongs to a king and Elin Gao, the smith, is trying to acquire her. So it seems that whoever's minding this cow must only watch and follow, but never attempt to control her. In fact, it seems that attempts to control or turn her cause as many problems as letting her get out of sight, because she likes to run away. Often she's headed back to a previous owner. Sometimes she's attracted to this magical halter that we heard about. So in this passage, the smith has the cow, but the halter has been stolen. So he's obliged to spend his days following his cow, and so then he's unable to make weapons. So Gavin and Gao ran quickly to the glass gaunik, caught her by the tail. The halter's just been stolen in this scene. He caught her by the tail and held her that way till evening, when he drove her home carefully and shut her up in the forge behind the bellows where he milked her. Gavin and Gao stopped work in his forge now and did nothing but mind the cow. He went out in the morning, followed her through every place, and brought her back in the evening. He held her tail all the day. So I suppose if he's holding the tail, he is following. In other words, she's pulling him along. And he never let go his hold of her till he had her fastened behind the bellows. So I'm kind of jumping between two different stories here, simply because it's the attributes of the cow, which I'm trying to show you. In this passage, the young hero Kian is looking after the cow in this passage I'm going to read, and he's trying to give the smith a chance to make him a sword. In the evening, he reports back to the smith, and it's not good news. Kian says, I was doing well till I came to Derrymore, and she went so near deep water that I was afraid she would go from me. I stopped her, and what did she do but fly away like a bird and go out through the sea? So this is a fascinating situation. The smith, probably originally the god Govnu, should be associated with making of weapons and by extension, the protection of the people. But he's in this dual role as caretaker of the cow. And the cow is a kind of sovereignty figure who assures abundance. And these two functions are often at odds. At the same time, the special way which the cow must be treated, she must be followed and watched over, but never controlled, is to me reminiscent of the careful treatment required of the fairy brides and cows in the stories we looked at earlier. If you're enjoying this series, why not take one of my online classes? There's almost always something on offer. Some classes have tiered pay-what-you-can pricing, and there are usually a few scholarships available for the more expensive classes. To get notifications about classes and about scholarships when they're announced, you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on my Patreon page. So another cow worth looking at is the little black heifer in the Second Battle of Moytuira. So we first hear of her when Angus counsels the Dagda, his father, to request her as payment for digging the ramparts of the greedy king Bresh. And Bresh gives the Dagda the cow, commenting that he would have expected the Dagda to ask for a bit more. So Bresh is very greedy and very appearance conscious, so he would imagine that he'd want lots of gold, not a little heifer, a little calf. The story's quite long. It continues as preparations are made for the battle, and the little black heifer is seemingly forgotten. It's only at the end of the tale, after the Tuatha Dé Danann have defeated Bresh, that the black heifer is brought out, and her lowing calls all the cattle of Ireland together into the possession of the Tuatha Dé Danann. So it's a bit reminiscent of the woman of the Tulworth Teg calling the cattle back from the greedy farmer before they all descend into the lake, except this time we're seeing things from the point of view of the immortal caretakers of the land, rather than of the greedy one who takes too much. We're seeing the story from the point of view of the Tuatha Dé Danann. So I really have taken you down a back road today. Thanks for coming along on my sightseeing tour. And if you think you have any insight into how all this relates to the cow in our story, please leave a comment anytime.